All right, let's dive right in. What if an ancient prophecy, wasn't actually a prediction about the future, but more like a diagnosis for what's happening right now? Today we're going to break down this pretty provocative analysis that does exactly that. It reimagines the four horsemen of the apocalypse, but for our modern 21st century world.
So the whole idea behind this analysis kicks off by challenging us with this one really powerful question. It kind of asks us to just put aside everything we think we know about the apocalypse for a second.
And instead, look at it like a diagnostic tool, a way to understand the here and now. See, according to this framework, the apocalypse isn't showing up on some fiery horse anymore. Nope, it's coming right through our screens, in live streams, in tweets, and a lot of the time, it's wearing a suit and tie.
Okay, so how does this whole diagnosis actually work? Well, the analysis starts by pointing to the first horseman, CONQUEST, and says he's already here, embodied by a very specific modern leader.
The source we're looking at uses this quote to really nail down the core philosophy of this modern version of conquest. I mean, think about it. It's a statement that basically says one person's fate is the world's fate. It completely reframes leadership. It's not about service anymore. It's about personal domination.
So here's what the source calls a symbolic diagnosis. And to be clear, this isn't a clinical thing. It's more of an analysis of the method. The argument is that this figure takes things like faith and fear and just weaponizes them, twists reality until being obedient starts to look like being patriotic. The whole strategy, according to this text, is built on convincing people who are hurting that he, and he alone, can feel their pain.
And that really gets to the heart of the argument for this first horseman. The conquest we're talking about here, it's not about land or armies. It's about the modern battlefield, our minds. It's a war for our attention.
Okay, so from the battle for attention, the analysis pivots to a much more literal battlefield. It identifies the second horseman, war, and his modern embodiment.
And this quote, wow, it really sums up an entire worldview, doesn't it? One where strength is the only thing that's real, and peace, well, peace is just a nice story you tell people who aren't strong enough to project power. It really sets the stage for a philosophy that's just built on endless conflict.
The diagnosis here points to this really calculated, almost theatrical use of power. The text describes invasions that are authored with cold precision. It suggests that suffering is basically staged, kind of like a dark puppet show, all to send a message. And in this view, aggression gets totally reframed as protection or self-defense, all of it fueled by this deep nostalgia for the glory days of old empires.
So what's the end goal then? Well, the analysis argues that the point isn't really to win in a traditional sense. It's about a constant show of force. It's about waging war just to remind the entire world that, hey, you're not as safe as you think. It's about shattering the illusion of peace.
All right, next up in this framework is the third horseman, famine. And he's represented by the leader of one of the most isolated and, frankly, impoverished nations on Earth. I mean, that is a seriously chilling idea. It paints a picture of leadership where loyalty isn't just something you demand, it's the absolute condition for survival. It ties a leader's ego directly to whether his people live or die. And the symbolic diagnosis here is just grim. It describes a system where hardship itself is used as a tool of control, almost like a public spectacle. The analysis really highlights that shocking contrast, right? A state busy building bombs and polishing missiles while its own people are literally begging for food. It's a system that, according to the text, runs on pure fear and forced worship.
But here's the really important distinction the source makes. The ultimate famine here, it isn't just about food. It's a starvation of the human spirit. It's about wiping out hope, wiping out any sense of personal freedom, any possibility of a better future. It's about leaving people chained, able to see the symbols of freedom, but with absolutely no way to ever reach them.
And that brings us to the final horseman in this analysis, the writer we know as Death.
Okay, this is a really complex statement. Let's unpack it. It's suggesting that the actions being taken aren't the start of the conflict. Instead, they're presented as the inevitable result of this really deep historical trauma and memory. In other words, a consequence, not a cause. So the source diagnoses the strategy as relying on something called moral disengagement. What's that? Well, it's basically a process of justifying your actions by framing them as self-defense, all rooted in this ancestral trauma. From this perspective, history isn't just background information, it becomes a weapon, used to keep these cycles of revenge going, all while pushing away any real responsibility.
And the source closes this section with a really haunting idea, that the biggest, most profound forms of destruction, they don't always scream. Sometimes death arrives quietly. Sometimes it just signs a treaty.
So okay, we've gone through these 4 figures, and you might be asking the same question the source brings up next. Are they all just psychopaths? Are we just looking at 4 individuals with some kind of clinical condition?
Well, the answer the text gives is a little more nuanced. It's not really about a specific clinical diagnosis for any one person. It's about a pattern of behavior, what the source calls psychopathic logic at scale. Think of it as a way of operating in the world, a way that completely disconnects actions from their consequences, uses manipulative charisma, and just shuts down morality to get what you want.
And here's the real kicker. According to this analysis, these leaders aren't the problem itself. They're just symptoms. They're the logical result of global systems that we've built, systems that now value fear more than wisdom, revenge more than justice, and control way more than care. And this is where the analysis turns the spotlight right back on us. It argues that these systems aren't just some abstract thing happening out there. No, they're enabled. They're enabled by our silence. And maybe most importantly, in our digital age, they are literally funded by our attention.
So that brings us to the final choice laid out in the text. You've basically got 2 paths. On one side, you can just passively accept it all. Keep scrolling, stay silent, buy into the media spin. But on the other side is a much more active stance, to actually look at what's happening without flinching, to call it what it is, and to do the hard work of building, protecting, and actually listening.
And so, this entire analysis leaves us with one final, very direct question. It's not just a challenge to understand this diagnosis of the world. It's a challenge to decide what our own role in it is going to be. So you have to ask yourself, which one are you here for?